All right, welcome back, guys. We're going to do another lesson today on parallel lines cut by a transversal. Hopefully, you weren't super confused by yesterday's lesson. I'm going to try and simplify things a little bit and just really work on our vocabulary today more than anything. So I want to start by just saying that in this example, we have line M, which is going to be parallel to line N. Now you're going to notice our parallel lines are in a different direction today than they were yesterday. I wanted to show you that parallel lines don't always have to be horizontal. They could be sort of any way you draw them, as long as they're not going to intersect. And they're going to be cut by our transversal P here today. And that's going to form for us 8 different angles. Angles 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Now, off to the side here, I'm going to kind of list some of the angles that fall into each of these categories. We talked about these yesterday. Now, supplementary angles, those are angles that are going to add up to 180 degrees. And those angles are angles that are on the same line. And generally speaking, will be next to each other or adjacent to each other. We can also use supplementary to describe any 2 angles that add up to 180. But for our purposes, I want to focus on the angles that are adjacent to each other. So that's angles like 1 and 2. They share this orange line right here. They are adjacent on this line. And since a line adds up to 180, that means that angles 1 and angle 2 are supplementary. Now, by the same token, we could also say angles 2 and angle 4 share the same line. I'll write that off to the side here. Angle 2 and angle 4 are also supplementary. Now, there's a lot of different ones we could also list, but I just want to sort of focus on a couple of them here. We could list 5 and 6, 6 and 8, 5 and 7, 7 and 8. Those are all supplementary angles, angles that will add up to 180. All right, the next angles that we're going to talk about are what we call vertical angles. Vertical angles are those angles that end up being directly across from each other. I kind of think of vertical angles, I try to think of an X and the angles that are going to be opposite of each other. So if I look at my parallel lines cut by a transversal, I sort of have a X, this would be a sideways X, I guess, that's formed here and here. So with 5, 6, 7, and 8, if you look at this X, the angles that are opposite of each other are going to be called vertical angles. So that's like our angles 6 and 7, and angles 5 and 8. Now, it obviously applies to the other side as well, so angles 1 and 4, and angles 2 and 3 would also be considered vertical angles. All right, now the next 3, we're going to sort of focus on the positioning here. So we're talking about corresponding angles for our next one. Corresponding angles, I like to think of some boxes were put around these. Corresponding angles are angles that are going to be in the same spot in those boxes. So for example, angles 2 and angle 6 are corresponding angles. They're both in the same location on that box. Angles 1 and 5 would be considered corresponding angles. Angles 3 and 7, angles 4 and 8 as well. All right. Next up, we're talking about alternate interior angles. Interior means interior of our parallel lines. So our parallel lines are M and N. So we're going to be on the inside. So inside of M and N, we're talking about angles 2, 5, 4, and 7. And ones that are alternating on the inside are those angles right here, like 2 and 7 or 5 and 4. So angle 2 and angle 7, and angle 5 and angle 4. Those are alternate interior angles. Now, along those same lines, our final ones that we're going to talk about are alternate exterior angles. Those are angles that are on the outside of our parallel lines. So now we're talking about these angles 6 and 8, 1 and 3, and angles that are opposite of each other or alternating from each other. So here we're talking about angles 1 and 8, and also angles 3 and angle 6. Now, supplementary adds up to 180. We talked about that a lot at the beginning of this. The other four, vertical, corresponding, alternate interior, and alternate exterior, are all what we refer to as congruent. Now, congruent means that they have the same angle measure. So it means if one angle is 50 degrees, the other angle is going to be 50 degrees as well. And we talk about angles being congruent. The symbol we use for that in math, so we don't have to write out congruent each time, is an equal sign with a little squiggly on top. This means congruent. So in our example here, I'm just going to use our corresponding one. Angle 2 is congruent to angle 6. Okay? Now, all that means is if angle 2 is 37 degrees, angle 6 is also going to be 37 degrees. So whether it's vertical, corresponding, alternate interior, or alternate exterior, those angles are all congruent, meaning they have the same angle measure. All right, hopefully this is making sense to you guys, but definitely shoot me a message. Let me know if you have any questions. I'll talk to you tomorrow.